5 years from now, if some kid has an idea for a game, they're going to write it down in a paragraph or two, and it's going to go into the top of one of these processes, and 3 hours later, you're going to have a prototype pop out that can be played on that person's laptop or whatever, and that changes everything.
Welcome to a new episode of XR and AI Spotlight, the show where we give the stage to the founders and creatives who are pushing the boundaries of XR and AI. My name is Gabriele Romagnoli, I'm your host, and I'm here today with Adam B. Levine. Adam is an asymmetrical thinker drawn by disruptive technology. He started with blockchain and more recently ventured into artificial intelligence. He is Chief Innovation Officer at Blockade Labs, a generative AI tool that allows anybody to create skyboxes and turn them into 3D environments from pure text. This tool is poised to change the way we build digital worlds. So stick with us and stick during this conversation to learn his approach when leading the creative vision of a generative AI tool.
I look at new technologies and then I run all the way to the end state. And I say, that's what this is going to do in X number of years. So what do we need to do?
The role of open source and tech giants in the Gen AI race.
A company like Google or OpenAI will show what's possible. Then the open source will come in and they will reinvent it in a way that is almost as efficient, but with like less than 1% of the resources actually used on it. And then we'll come in and we'll take
how AI is disrupting the creative industry.
If you're someone who makes your money off of Photoshop, and knowing how to use that with these expert systems, that's a big threat. But the flip side of it is the thing that you've always wanted to do, but it was impossible because you didn't have the resources and execution skill to pull it off, that probably is going to be possible.
And the impact that AI is going to have on our society.
The question is not, will we lose control? The question is, what does the world look like in a world where execution is not the challenge? There's not a single area of the world that's not going to be impacted by this in some significant way. And we don't know the answers to what that's going to look like, but we know that it's going to change.
But before we get into it, I want to thank our sponsor, Cognitive 3D, who made this episode possible. Cognitive 3D is a spatial analytic platform to improve how organizations can analyze user behavior in VR and AR and turn the findings into actionable insights. Cognitive 3D has a handy SDK that integrates easily in Unity and Unreal. Data are collected and displayed in 3D contextually to help you improve user engagement and retention. Whether you are designing training and simulation, running consumer research, or creating games and entertainment content, Cognitive 3D will change the way you track and learn from your data. Head to cognitive3d.com to learn more. And now it's time to welcome Adam into the spotlight.
Thank you very much for the invitation and the great introduction.
So, look, I am a big fan of what you guys are building. And from the very early moment when I stepped in and I saw that just entering text, you could create what was back then simply a 360 image. Now, maybe Blockade Labs and Skybox AI turned into something more. Can you guide us through that journey from that initial idea to what is now?
Yeah, at the very beginning, we had this conversation about text to game. And text to game was this idea that if you could start to see like different types of solutions that would do one simple thing, so like you want to create an image of something, right? Like this is where I got my start in the AI space back in the kind of VQGAN plus clip days, back right after OpenAI released Clip, which was sort of one of the foundational open source pieces that then made things like Midjourney and stuff like that possible later on. So we looked at those very early days back when you really couldn't see anything in these images. They were just kind of blurry smears. And we said, hey, if you can do something like this now, this will improve. And once this improves, those improvements will make it so you can layer together multiple steps, multiple types of AI engines to do more complicated things. So the output of one AI engine flows into the input of another AI engine, right? And so the idea here behind text to game is that you start with a very simple premise. So the one that I've been using for the last year is I want to create a prototype of a game that is, set in Victorian Europe, that's a zombie shooter that only has mice and rodents as characters and all lines are sung, right? That's an insane prototype to make in real life because it would take 6 to 12 months to do. And at the end, it probably isn't actually good enough to warrant all the effort behind it. But if the world is one where you just write that sentence, you put it in at the top of a kind of cascading process, and then it filters down through different pieces, building different pieces. Because effectively, the core insight here is that artificial intelligence and the way that generative AI is expressing is a magical form of autocomplete. And the thing about autocomplete technologies is that as you add additional pieces, you can then generate pieces that weren't there. And so we looked at that and said, okay, 5 years from now, if some kid has an idea for a game, they're going to write it down in a paragraph or two, and it's going to go into the top of one of these processes. And 3 hours later, you're going to have a prototype pop out that can be played on that person's laptop or whatever. And that changes everything. So that's where this started.
So the idea was not to, hey, let's have a generative skybox, or like, okay, with this generative model, we can create flat images. How about we generate instead of 360 image? It's like, it started with the vision of turning text into a game.
Yeah. It started with this is a thing that I tend to bring to the table, which is that I look at new technologies and then I run all the way to the end state. And I say, that's what this is going to do in X number of years. So what do we need to do to go from, how do we solve that underpants gnome problem, right? The famous South Park thing, right? You've got your starting point, you've got your ending point, and in the middle, you've got a big question mark. That's what the AI world is looking at right now. We're in that big question mark part. And so what we thought to do was to take some of the unique advances that we had gained, which was in large part at that point, one of the primary advantages we had was a process by which we could create very, very large 6 or 8K or even larger than that images with AI in a very short period of time with a very high level of fidelity. And that then unlocked the use case for us to do skyboxes in a way that really nobody else could. And so far, we haven't really seen anybody else do it.
I agree. So the point here is, okay, we want to tackle the text to game. We want to go into text to game. And based also on our knowledge, we decide that environments is going to be, let's say, the first thing that we are going to tackle based on also our own, let's say, learnings and our own expertise. And we're going to address that. So then one question when you start using and creating for these new models, how is different generating an environment and then a skybox and then a 3D or 2D, whatever it is, than, for example, prompting for generating purely a 3D models or maybe an image?
Yeah, the difference really isn't that significant. So we live in a world right now where the primitives, right, the individual kind of modalities or the individual affordances or possibilities that they exist out there to do things that nobody is doing with the tools yet. And so it's a lot less about trying to invent the core underlying technologies. And it's a lot more about looking at a use case, something that people actually do in real life and figuring out how do we apply this in a way where it's not just like an improvement in, like 10%, 50%, 100%. That's incremental improvement in the world of what's possible. So what we did was we kind of were like, hey, what if nobody had ever made one of these before, but we knew that you needed these? How would we go about doing that? And that's what we arrived at. And it's a very complex, we do use open source components, certainly, but most of our system is actually built around highly optimizing all of those things in really every way possible. And that's another interesting thing about the open source space is that the open source shows what's possible. It's actually hilarious because a company like Google or OpenAI will show what's possible. Then the open source will come in and they will reinvent it in a way that is almost as efficient, but with like less than 1% of the resources actually used on it. And then we'll come in and we'll take inspiration from those open source components, and then we'll build our own version that uses the insight from the closed source, the innovation and enhancements from the open source, and then layers on our own work with our AI architect, who's a total genius when it comes to these types of optimization problems and is totally obsessed with it. So that's kind of been our approach. And the idea here is really that we don't need to create the whole ecosystem, right? Like there's such a temptation when you get into one of these things and you have a big idea like text to game, which I don't claim is exclusively ours. It's an idea that's obviously out there. But you have that big idea and it's like, how do I create that? And there's always, I think, this assumption, or at least often when I talk to other people, where they're like, hey, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that, and then we're going to do that, and then we're going to do that. That may be true for us, but I think that the path is much more likely to stay focused on things that are important to and built around the environments that we're helping people create. So the idea here is that an environment is one part of it, but it's okay if other people are experts in the space and they do 3D assets better than us. We will have that functionality, but do we need to build it ourselves from the ground up? I'm not convinced of that. And I think that this specialized ecosystem that's emerging of interoperable APIs is really powering a lot more, like there's a lot more that can come of this versus each company trying to build their own individual ecosystem.
Yeah, because I mean, there is so much going on that you cannot just build everything on your own. It goes
Seriously.
from 3D animation, interactions, logics, and all that. That it's. I think it makes much more sense that everybody specializes in their own way, and probably within those specialization, there are even extra special. I mean, there could be 100% characters and one for assets and one for props, even, right? So that is also something that I think it's going to be inevitable. And you mentioned one important thing regarding the this concept of open source. I'm really curious to hear what are your thoughts around it, because indeed there are those gatekeepers right now already that, and instead you see other, let's say, players like Hugging Face, for example, and many others that are instead like purely opening everything to the community. What is your take as someone building a tool?
Yeah, so open source has been complicated for a long time. It's it definitely offers a lot for it. It accelerates the pace of technology significantly for there to be a vibrant open source ecosystem. It prevents lock-in, into the closed source players in the space, and it allows this sort of like Rebel Alliance versus Evil Empire kind of dynamic, right? Where it's like the big closed source guys, they've got all the resources, they know how to do stuff faster, but they're a company, right? And so they have all the restrictions and limitations that come with being that, as opposed to over here, you've got this scrappy group of, loosely affiliated people who have really no resources, but they're doing it anyways. And it's working in ways that are weird because the imbalance is so significant that it actually kind of makes you reanalyze the whole thing. So that's the ecosystem, right? On the one side, you've got closed source. On the other side, you've got open source. And then in the middle, you've got all of these companies. And companies that don't fall into the big guys and yet aren't also the small guys have a really weird set of incentives in this space. And it's very difficult to operate because you want the open source accolades and attention that comes from releasing new work. But at the same time, it's such a competitive space. Just trying to, again, like we turned on monetization last summer and we've been very successful with that, but still like it's a journey to get to profitability when you're actively building one of these brand new products in a space that didn't really exist before a year ago. It's really hard to be a company because to the extent that you embrace open source, it has to work, because if it doesn't work, then you have sacrificed something valuable that can help you as a company to raise money or to continue along and to survive. And the other part is that in a really competitive early space, you actually wind up giving R&D to your direct competitors. So for example, if we were to release the technologies that we use in order to generate very, very large images on very low hardware, because we actually use, we don't even use commercial GPUs. We use consumer GPUs to do what we do because we've made it so efficient. So like, that's the challenge. If we were to release that, it would be a big deal, but also it would then make it so that the unique thing that we have that kind of keeps us, ahead of the game outside of everything else that we've done, is now not a factor that we can use to say, oh, this is what differentiates us. So it's really challenging. Open source is super important, but if you engage with it as a strategy too early on, or you do it for things that are too core to your business, then you can wind up basically hamstringing yourself. And then that's bad for everybody because it means the service goes away entirely. So it's really challenging, but open source is absolutely critically important. And the people who are driving it, some of whom oh gosh, I've been watching John Durbin a lot or recently. He's doing like the bagel model and stuff like that over in LLM world and stuff. And it's like, these people are incredible. They're doing work that is on a level that is far, far beyond the resources that they have. And that is what is powering a lot of this stuff forward. And we'll continue to do so.
So, Adam, I want to go back a little to kind of like the technology, because you mentioned that to be so important for you specifically when you mentioned about your own way of generating these big images on a little resource. So, and it's just also beyond the images in a way. So right now, one of the things that you guys have introduced are these very accurate depth maps that allow to basically explode or not sure, but mold the image into this 3D environment. And I was wondering if you can tell us maybe a little bit about that. And since technically there are many different ways of generating 3D from images, if you have explored other ways of bringing those into 3D.
Yeah, we've explored a number of different ways of going from 2D to 3D. And the purpose here of why we care about this, by the way, is because if you're building a 3D scene, that's actually quite challenging, especially if you haven't already created a palette of assets and stuff like that. So the idea here is that if you can prototype your experience in 2D in 20 seconds with just this simple interface, but you can get the feel for it as if it's 3D, then that actually is a much better process than creating natively in 3D, just because that's going to take a lot longer, right? So that's kind of the way that we think about it. Our process when we actually roll this out is going to be, you'll create and get to a place where you're happy with the overall structure. Then you'll go into edit mode and you'll use our new form of large format in painting to basically perfect any issues while you're still in the 2D world.
That I want it. That is something that I really want.
We just entered testing internally on it. Man, this feature's been in development for a long time. We had to reinvent how in painting works in order to pull it off, but it's really cool. You can do multiple spots at once. It's great. So that's the idea, is you go from generation and, remixing and whatever you want there until you get to a place you're happy. Then you work within one of those, and we have this like layer system that's really simplistic where you can, basically add as many changes as you want, but toggle them on or off. And kind of changed it. So it's really, really flexible. And then from there, once you're happy with it, then you press the 3D button. That pulls it into, actually, it's not even part of our application. We've kind of built another application on top that lives in it. And then it kind of pulls the depth map, which, as you said, we basically increased quality about 8x as far as we can tell. From what our past approach was. And that was like another significant build, which was really interesting. So we take that, we then apply that to the inside of a sphere, essentially, and we use the depth map to deform that. And then we have what we internally call mesh completion, which is the thing that we've been banging on for the last 2 months at this point, and almost there. And that basically allows you to because the problem with once you create those 3D scenes is that they only have data for a certain perspective. So you're standing in the middle of what we consider a snow globe, right? And you look around and everything looks fine. But the greater that 3D effect is and the more parallax there is, like if there's a building here and then there's mountains behind, the building will move faster. And so you'll see kind of the low polygon areas where it just doesn't have the information. So that's what mesh completion is.
Some kind of holes,
Yeah, exactly. Holes in the mesh. Yeah. So it's useful if you're standing right in the middle, but really where this becomes something that's special is at the point when we're able to say, okay, and then behind that house is this, and you can walk around the corner and see that. And so that's where we're going with all of this. And then from there, again, this feeds into our concept of smart environments, which is what we think is what the future is gonna look like, which is essentially these packages of so you take one of these things that we create, right? Think of that as like a world seed. And then from that world seed, you could grow it. And as it grows, effectively what's happening is you're moving the snow globe, right? And you're generating pieces. So early on, one of the visions that I had was, a big problem with creating a new massively multiplayer game is you have to build the world in advance, right? But what if you didn't? What if instead you could start with like a blank canvas world where you have 10,000 people who start from, the middle city, at the Arctic or whatever, and then everybody goes around exploring, and as they're exploring, the world is actually created for the first time. There's really interesting stuff you can do with that. So the core of your question, I think, is why are we doing it this way? And the answer is because we think this is the right way. And we think that other people who are doing it other ways might also be right, but that this world is so different with the capabilities that exist here that it's almost foolish to look at our current design patterns and usage patterns and say, aha, it's going to be a better version of this. I don't think it's going to be a better version of that. I think almost always it's going to be something entirely different. And so it's going to look weird until it wins. But then once it wins, it's going to be like, oh yeah, obviously that's the way that you do it.
I just wanted to have a quick break to remind you that the recording of these episodes and many more great conversations with incredible experts are available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Just head over to my profile or the episode description, open up the link in bio, and pick your platform of choice. And now, let's get back to the show.
So I don't know if we're right, but I'm pretty sure we are.
And this brings in a way like all the approach that people or creatives are having to these technologies when they try to adapt and shape them to a workflow that already exists, and is understandable, right? The point is that I think that the creators that I feel are really winning are the ones that are throwing away their way of working and instead embracing these new tools, and to some extent also being guided by them in a way, right?
Yeah. No. I mean, again, so again, I spent 10 years in crypto, never did ICOs, never did anything like that, right? But I was there with a lot of the early thinking and a lot of the early platform stuff. The challenge that you run into over and over again is this human assumption that first practices that work are best practices. And that's a huge problem because it means that one example of success skews the trajectory of future progress by suggesting something that may not be true. And so what it is to say is that I think that the approaches that we're seeing today, like Photoshop, for instance, right? That's a really great improvement, right? It's a substantial change from the way that things work, but it's not a fundamental change. And so it increases productivity.
You're talking about overdrawing on paper, right? It's a significant.
No. So I even mean Photoshop's implementation of AI, right? So I'm talking specifically about the implementations of AI, right? You have different companies that have different incentives, right? So Photoshop obviously has products that are very popular. So for them, it makes sense to put stuff in there. But I agree with you at a fundamental level that the next thing that becomes as big as Photoshop in that same category probably won't work at all like Photoshop, probably won't have a million drop-down menus, right? That gives you all that power because yes, it's powerful, but if you have for example, imagine if instead of Adobe had gone to an entirely agent-based approach. And that agent-based approach has you as the designer and the user of Photoshop, you provide a brief. And then the brief that you provide is executed, analyzed, and assessed by a team of different AI agents that have different skills, that then at the end of it, rather than you guiding the process, it comes back and says, here's 15 versions of what you asked for. Do you like any of these? If so, we'll continue on, right?
And by the way, I think also that it's not just that. I mean, those agents are also going to ask follow-up questions to clarify things, to specify.
Exactly.
So it's not just you throw something and you get something back. It's like,
right.
Okay, we are going to build this together. Oh, what about this? Well, what about this? Do you want, this is a mood board. Which mood? So like a real process works. It's not like throwing something and getting something back.
And the difference is that the cost to do that, which right now makes it so that that's a process that's limited to a very, very, very small number of people relative to how many people live around the world, you will have that increase exponentially. Probably, 20, 30% of global populations will be able to use that type of process in a way that they can't now. And so it's terrifying in some ways because it means that if you're someone who makes your money off of Photoshop, and knowing how to use that with these expert systems, like that's a big threat. You have some benefit from a monopoly of knowledge, right? And this disrupts that. But the flip side of it is that it's not just that, right? It's not just your industry that's being disrupted. It's everyone's industry that's being disrupted. So the thing that you've always wanted to do, but it was impossible because you didn't have the resources and execution skill to pull it off, that probably is going to be possible about the same time. So it's this weird mix of like disempowerment for people who have expertise and knowledge, and empowerment for them also, but everybody else at the same time, right? So I don't know what the result is going to be, but it's a
You know,
bizarre mix. Yeah.
and I'm still like, whenever I see this tool appearing, I always wonder if AI is more like to make professional more proficient and faster, more effective, or make everybody a creator. Because those, it feels right now where we stand is AI is mostly like gearing towards, because I think it has to do also with that monetization aspect, because of course this company need to start making money, need to start proving themselves, so they are being shaped and becoming something that makes creators more powerful, that can be used in their professional work. But the whole end game, I think it's not going to be like that, because it's like if you give a camera to anybody, then anybody can become a content creator, right? And that's where the world change, because that's where everybody can tell story. And now we live in a world where, for example, that is what driving like content experiences. So this is one of the things I'm struggling. Where do we stand right now? Is AI to make a professional more powerful, or to make everybody a creator?
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer in the medium term is both are true, and in the short term, it's everybody a creator is the better path. Is the more realistic near term path, and I'll tell you why. When we started working on Skybox, we built it with this game industry in mind, right? And that was a good target for us, and it remains our target. But what became true is when we started monetizing was that it was not necessarily game studios that were our most prominent type of customers. It was actually all these other types of businesses that we had never even really thought about, that turns out if you made it trivially easy to create a 360 environment, they had uses for those, right? And it's, R&D companies who used, skyboxes to, to have product mock-ups set in a type of context that would make them more powerful, right? Or, like we had a ton of like therapists and, convalescent home servicing companies come to us and be like, hey, we're doing experiential, therapy for people in nursing homes, right? Or exposure therapy or something else like that, right? These are not the most common use cases for us, but there was like 100 of this type of use case that were things that we had never really thought about, but which turns out once we had lowered the bar enough in terms of what it took to actually get what you wanted out of this type of thing, they had uses for it and found us to be very valuable. So the reason why I bring that up is to say that the reason why games were not our game studios, larger game studios were not our primary user initially, is because game studios have the most demanding use case, right? We can make it easy for them to do the thing, but they still, again, the quality needs to be as good as it can possibly be. And that's not true for a lot of the other early types of users, right? And so if you look around the world today of AI tools, I think mostly what you see is individual adoption, right? And a lot of it is early adopter, a lot of it is novelty driven. But it's not all that. There is some business stuff in there, but the business tools will never be less mature than they are today. And like that was a big challenge I had, earlier this year. Was I was like, I everywhere I looked, I saw so many tools that I really wanted someone to create that would be so useful to us running the business. Like one of the things that I'd really love to see somebody do is create a like daily stand-up tool that allows for everybody on the team to say, hey, here's what I'm working on, here's what I'm doing, here's who I may be blocked by, and then have an LLM in the background that's forming like a personalized company newsletter for each person each day based on everything that they need to know, right? Like you could just and then you could take it further. You could be like, okay, well, this person likes everything to be as concise as possible and just doesn't want very many words, so just give it to them as a bullet list. And this person wants everything written in the style of Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody lyrics, right? Like it's trivial to do that. Like this is an amazing idea, right? Somebody needs to do these things. And the change. So anyways, it's just to say that like the world is nuts and this stuff is going to get crazier and crazier, but the use cases we expect to be the places where this will land first, I think are actually the last places. And in fact, what we're going to discover is all of the bazillion use cases that we never knew existed, but which now that it's so easy to use these tools, suddenly they're viable.
So there was one in a recent interview. There was a statement that kind of like I felt was very strong, and I'm gonna share it with you because I think also other people need to. And it's about indeed how humans create with the help of AI. So you said most of the tools that exist today are about how AI can help humans. This is actually a backward positioning. Instead, the AI should be executing under the human guidance. Are we going to lose control?
It's a good question that I don't have an answer to, but I think a lot of, so technology is about possibilities, right? And these technologies provide incredible possibilities, and they make things possible that are totally impossible, implausible, uneconomical. You couldn't do them. You wouldn't do them. Possible, right? Possible, easy, plausible, affordable, all of that stuff solves everything. So the question is not, will we lose control? The question is, what does the world look like in a world where execution is not the challenge, right? Because what these technologies do is they make it so that execution, which is typically 99.9%, right? The idea over here is the tiny, tiny, tiny seed of the thing. And then the execution is the tree, right? And so if you got a great seed, but you grow a stupid tree, it's still a stupid tree, even though the seed was great, right? So that's the situation in terms of where we are right now. Ultimately, I think that's what we're going to do. I think we're going to plant seeds. And I think that planting seeds will be enough. I think having ideas will be enough. And I think that this will have an effect on sort of the world economy and the way that the world works in much the same way that YouTube had on how content was created and how content was sort of how people became, important in the world of video, right? Before YouTube, it was possible to do it, but you had to be able to build a website, you had to be able to host your own video, you had to do a ton of stuff that when YouTube came out, you just didn't have to do any of that stuff anymore. And so it opened up the possibilities to everybody, right? That's what's happening.
I do agree that the change seems to be, on the other hand, more drastic. I mean, when you say I don't need, we are just planting seed, execution is going to be assigned to someone else. It brings us back to that conversation: is how will creators, what would be the role of the makers, because those are not necessarily the one that come up with idea, and I think there should be still be space for craft, right?
Well, I have a buddy who runs an execution-focused shop, right? It's a company, that basically other companies go to with an idea and then they build it, right? And we've had conversations. Maybe 6 months ago, we had a conversation about this, and I was like, I built my first product ever. Over the course of a couple of nights, I had this great idea for something to hijack the Hulu. The Hulu video player, and then do this cool stuff that I want to do with it. I'm not a developer at all. I'm a guy who talks for a living. And I was able to do it with ChatGPT, even a very early version of it. And I was amazed by it. And I got it working. I debugged the whole thing, my first experience with it. Suddenly, the idea that I had was unlocked by executional challenges that would have prevented me from doing that without bringing on like a technical co-founder or something, right? But similarly, this guy is all about execution. And he says to me, that's amazing, because what I've been using it for is to get ideas and to build out the ideas into something that really seems like it could work, which is something that I have never been able to do before. I'm great at iterating on other people's stuff, but I'm not good at doing it myself. Mm-hmm. But I now can do this. And we had this conversation, and it was me telling him that, then him telling me this. And I was like, oh, this is everything. So it doesn't matter what side of the table you're on. This patches all the holes because it can do everything. But it doesn't do everything without being directed, right? And that direction, so the core insight in terms of who's the competent party in what we're talking about here is that if you're talking about something technical, rule-based, that involves a lot of output, probably that's the AI. But the AI can't assess its own work. It doesn't understand what it's doing. It's just doing it because you told it to. That may change in the future, but I think that right there is the power to the thing. is that if you're a human who can execute, well, then this can help you with ideas and it can help you with execution. If you're a human who can have ideas but doesn't know how to execute, this can help you with both those things too. And if you do both of them, then it helps you everywhere and it just amplifies you generally. So again, like the future is very uncertain. I think that there are so many unknowns. I'm actually, I think, in the process of really trying to start a discussion show about this because there are so many conversations that we need to have in open and non-fearful ways about what the future really looks like. But that's the challenge that we're in right now is no one can see that, but we can all see that there's a wave coming. We don't understand what's behind it, but we know it's coming.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be faster than what we imagine, to be very
Hugely.
honest in this case. So that's
the next 3 to 5 years is going to be nuts.
And so maybe start looking a bit at the future, right? So what do you think are the challenges ahead? Maybe for you guys, maybe more in detail. It's about the tech. It's about the use cases. Where do you see it?
I mean, honestly, our biggest challenge is just that we're continuing to build a product that nobody's built before, which requires a lot of trial and error. So again, like the stuff that we actually release is a small proportion of what we're actually thinking about and working on inside at any given time. And, and then also just running as fast as we can. Like there's a unique moment here because the thing about it, the challenges that stand in front of us really don't have to do with the technology. They have to do with the realignment of civilization and the way that we think about ourselves. And in that type of a situation, there's a very non-zero chance that government involvement comes in and starts to distort the market, which is something that could start to hurt open source and could start to ensconce the closed source players. So I'm very concerned about that. And the underlying problem is that nobody understands. So typically the thing that you do when you don't understand is you wait until you understand. You try to understand. And I'm not convinced that that's going to happen this time, unfortunately. So I think the stakes are so high in this that it's more dangerous to the establishment. It's more dangerous to the way that things are than crypto is by a substantial margin, just because even though that's a really deep change in an important area, money, it's not a broad change like this. This is everything. There's not a single area of the world that's not going to be impacted by this in some significant way. And we don't know the answers to what that's going to look like, but we know that it's going to change.
So, and your concern is referring to, let's say, laws, governments, or bigger entities to start interfering with this because of fear before they actually really understand what it is about.
Yeah, I mean, so the issue is well-intentioned interventions that have unintended consequences, which are inevitable and obvious if you think about it just a little bit. The problem is that we don't hire politicians to do nothing. We hire politicians to essentially be cathartic to us, to make us feel like they're doing something, if not actually do the thing that they're supposed to do, right? So the challenge here is less about government doing something that distorts the market because they're trying to hurt it, and it's more like imagine that they ban the use of LLMs, that aren't licensed.
No, but I didn't mean it about hurting the market. It's more like preserving the status quo because what might come, it feels scary or it's uncertain. So this is I didn't mean is that the disrupting the market will be a consequence of something that is just.
Well, no. Yeah, no, I understand your question. What my example very, very simply is that imagine that so it works like this. So AI is a shield and a sword all at once, right? So the future is going to be one where we are constantly bombarded with AI content and AI scams that are attempting to take advantage of us. To the extent that you see government aiming to crack down on AI because of that concern, what you would actually see is a slight diminishment of that concern, but mostly what you would see is the elimination of the shield, right? So the sword is the person who's trying to attack you is using the AI as a way to go offensive. But you could have an AI yourself that's running on your local hardware, again, just on your phone or something, whose entire job it is to watch for that shit, to keep up to date on the best practices and to protect you from it, right? So that's an example. Like nobody's thinking about that right now. Nobody's thinking about, ID, like personal, protectors on the internet for each individual person. But that's a reality that could happen, in the not too distant future on commodity hardware for each individual person. And so that's my concern is that we know what the problems are. We can see the things coming that are going to be issues, but we can't see the solutions they provide. that are provided in that same package. And if we ban the technologies or we clamp down on the technologies, require licensing, whatever, the only thing that does is it prevents actors like me from using the technology to build stuff that's powerful and good and can really help us. But the people who are going to build the swords and use those, they're not going to care at all, right? That's the issue underlying this, is that the good people are the ones who follow the rules. And if you make rules for bad people, they're not going to follow them, but they are going to affect the good people.
That's a very good point. Actually, because putting the regulation, rules are for a subset of sadly, for a subset of people, indeed.
Yeah.
And I think we can all agree that AI can be used certainly for a lot of good, but has the potential, like any technology, also to be used for.
But imagine how many good people there are in the world versus how many bad people, right? How many people just want to live their lives as normal people, as opposed to, we're going to win. Like the good people are going to win unless we get our hands tied by the people who are so concerned about the bad people that they don't care about the collateral damage. So, the good news here is that this is moving so fast that chances are that government will miss it. But that moving so fast also is one of those, it's like a cat, right? Like it's drawn their attention. And so now they're watching it. And if they can get it, they will, but it's hard because people see it as a positive too.
Thank you. This like diverge, but I love also this kind of like talking about these kind of things, because it takes away a bit from just the tooling, the creation, to see what the impact can be really of these technologies. And just to close up, I still wanted to ask, you mentioned several things that are very exciting coming up from Blockade Labs. Maybe can you break it us down? What are we going to see in the upcoming months?
Well, with luck, we will see the release of edit mode, which will, like I said, which will be a big deal. We've been working on that one for a long time. That used to be called add to this, by the way. It's gone through three name changes internally. And then also mesh completion. Mesh completion is a little bit more of a wild card because, again, we've solved the core math problems behind it, and now we're doing the applying it to engine stuff. And so we think we've cracked all the hard problems, but that's the thing about hard problems, right? Is that until it's actually in production and it's actually working in a way, that doesn't break, it's a little iffy. So I can't give you timeframes on that one, but we're real close, and and it's going to be pretty great. And then that will be our 1.0 release effectively. When we've got those two things out, we will officially be out of beta, which I'll be very happy about. And we did it in just a year-ish. We'll do it by the end of this quarter. So it's
exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting
stuff. Indeed. And I think there is nothing more exciting also than seeing a tool like that be put in the hands of the people, because those are the ones that really make incredible things and indeed come up with new use cases on which you can build upon. And so, oh, wow, it's not just about game development or building games. It's what about this opportunity? What about this opportunity? And I think this is really one of the great things of being in a field like this, where making tools for creative is just like, it just feels very rewarding.
The thing that's nice about working in AI is just that it is so fast. It is like it's a terrible thing about it. It makes it very like I've written I think 3 or 4 24-month plans in the last 6 months, and stuff keeps changing, and then we're 6 months ahead of our expectations and got to do it again. So it's a beautiful thing. But yeah, the opportunity to live in a moment like this during this important transition and to even just be using the tools, much less building them, is I think a real privilege, and certainly one that I think as we look back on it we'll come to understand.
Adam, thank you very, very much for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you really much for listening in. And remember to head to YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts and check out more insightful conversation revolving around XR and AI. And if you really like the show, please leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or a thumbs up on YouTube. It really helps me keep doing this and shine the spotlight on the latest and greatest advancement in XR and AI. Till next time.